Okay, so Ali, great to have you back. Great to have the voice of Ali Velshi here on Mea Culpa in order to try to help us to walk through the nonsense that's there. There's so much of it, I just got to jump right into it. The hour goes by sadly too quickly. So Ali, tell me please, how do we reconcile a Supreme Court? All right, a Supreme Court that greenlights the deportation of vulnerable Venezuelan migrants when you have especially justices like Alito and Thomas, all right, who sort of wax poetic about constitutional overreach.
Yep.
I mean, these are our Supreme Court justices. Is this just cruelty in robes?
Yeah, so I think there's three questions here. One is the Thomas and Alito problem, because a couple of other conservative Supreme Court justices seem to be struggling with how they actually continue to let Donald Trump do what he's doing. The other issue is, there's been these conversations that they happen less now than they did in the first weeks of the Trump administration about what constitutes a constitutional crisis. And a lot of really smart lawyers will say, don't look for the bright red line that gets crossed. Look for all the little lines that get crossed and all the ways in which this government kind of belittles and ignores, with the help of some Supreme Court justices, the law. And that's what's happening here, right? In answer to these cases having to do with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the government has never once said in court what it's done, or they've said it's a mistake. And yet outside in the court of public opinion, they're carrying on about this guy being MS-13 and being a terrorist and being a domestic abuser, all of which, if important, should be made in an argument in court. And yet, weirdly, they're not doing that. They're just kind of ignoring the courts. And this administration is just kind of softening up Americans for the idea that courts don't matter. We don't actually have to look for these things. So you've got two problems. You've got the administration sort of implying that courts don't matter, and you've got the Supreme Court in this remarkable struggle for validity and legitimacy itself, taking some weird positions. And then you got John Roberts on the side trying to hold up the legitimacy of the courts and of lower courts. And yet you have Kavanaugh and you've got Amy Coney Barrett, both sort of unsure about where they are. So to me, that's the constitutional crisis, right? Nobody seems to be taking their job all that seriously. And the administration is very creatively not coming out and saying, we defy you, Supreme Court of the United States. They're just kind of slow walking everything while this Abrego Garcia sits in jail in El Salvador, and a whole bunch of people are just getting disappeared from the streets of America.
And the sad part is it's not just Kilmar Abrego Garcia. There are a multitude of individuals. In fact, I saw a statistic that over 45% of those that have been disappeared to this El Salvadorian concentration camp, that they have never had anything maybe other than a speeding ticket. I mean, the lowest level offense nonsense that's there with no affiliation whatsoever to MS-13. But I'm with you on this whole thing that this should be fought out in a court of law. Instead, this judge has just asked, okay, you're making the claim that they're MS-13. You're making claims that they have crimes, violent crimes, beating women in the back of the head with baseball bats, pushing them into subway trains, and so on.
Right.
Show us the proof.
Just show us, yeah.
Because
we are still a nation. If it's true, that's a different discussion. But when did we decide we just don't have protection? Then they use this weird language about how citizens have protections and non-citizens. Everybody's got protections in the courts. That's it. You saw that thing that Trump posted with in theory, Abrego Garcia's knuckles saying MS-13. I mean, the nonsense that goes on, and I would call it nonsense and chaos. And on the tariff side, I think it is, except that this nonsense and chaos is actually costing us our system of law and order. It's costing us our democracy. It's costing us our liberties. I mean, you've seen the decline in the number of tourists who are coming to America, right? Some of that's Canadians who are mad at America. Some of it are people who don't want to support America because it's crazy stuff. Some of it's people like Canadians who come to America more than anywhere else, who have proper valid working visas in Canada, who just don't want to get swept up in some kind of raid and end up in an El Salvadoran prison. It's like, I'm going to go to Europe. It's safer. It's crazy, chaotic stuff, but our freedoms are disappearing in the process. So on one hand, we can't belittle it as being crazy, chaotic. It is, but these are our liberties at stake, and that's, again, Michael, you've been screaming this from the rooftops for a long time, and there might have been people who said, "Well, I'm not Michael Cohen. I'm not in the crosshairs of Donald Trump or this administration."
Hey, you are now.
You said this to me very specifically. You said at some point everyone will be in the crosshairs, and by the way, you have to stand up for the fact that nobody must be in the crosshairs, right? The law must apply equally to everyone, because if you do that whole Pastor Niemöller thing and you wait for there to be no one to speak for you, that's kind of beside the point. You have to talk when the first person who is not given due process is not given due process, as you were not in an instance. So that's where we have to be worried. We don't need to say they're not coming for me. You've got to sit there and say they don't need to be coming for anyone. If they've got a case against any of these immigrants about the fact that they're criminals or terrorists, make the case in court. And what did Vance say? I don't want to pay for all these. Americans shouldn't pay for all these court cases.
Right. And that's what I was going to bring up. Trump in the Oval Office started talking about how it will take 200 years in order to prosecute and to have cases against each of these migrants that they deem to be illegal and of the need for deportation. I'm not so sure I agree with that. I don't necessarily disagree. So instead of just rounding them up with Tom Homan and having Kristi Noem showing up with a flap jacket and a fully loaded AR-15, how about come up with a policy?
Correct.
How about come up with a policy that works? Not some sort of stupidity where you just send people out, do it in the cruelest of manner, because to me, that's where the message gets lost. It's in the cruelty, it's in the unconstitutionality, it's in the fact that just because you say it, Mr. President, just because you have others repeating, regurgitating the lie like Carolyn Levitt, doesn't make it just doesn't make it true.
Right. And that's the important part. And you can apply this to immigration. And by the way, Michael, you and I can talk about how for decades, neither party has sorted this out particularly well. But I was watching a clip from a debate between Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush in the election that Reagan ultimately, the nomination Reagan won. And they were trying to outdo each other in how far they would go to legalize some of these illegal immigrants in the United States, because we needed them and we needed to treat them with compassion, and immigrants are important in this country. How far we have come, but we are absent of policy. We are just doing the enforcement. Same thing with tariffs, by the way. We're absent of manufacturing policy, but we're doing the enforcement part, the tariffs part. This is not a way to run a small, undeveloped country, let alone the most important country and the most prosperous country in the world. That's the chaos. I get that there's a goal at the end here, but there's no policy that leads us here. Remember, in a presidential debate, Donald Trump was asked about healthcare, and he said he's got the concept of a plan.
I have the concept of a plan in my head.
This is the problem. We can't be having governments running with concepts of plans on things that actually affect people's lives, livelihoods, and liberty.
So let me ask you this, because I was watching your fantastic show, Velshi, of course, interesting name. Where'd you come up with that one? And you had a what do you call it? A statistic that you posted on there, and the statistic was the number of people in America who are unhappy, who think that Trump is handling immigration well or not well, right? Positive versus negatives. And I was surprised that 55% of this country give him positive numbers as it relates to immigration. Question I really want to ask you: how the hell does something like that happen? 55% of this country, 180, 190, 200 million Americans think that this is the right way to go. Where the hell is the outrage from the so-called moral majority, both in the GOP as well as in the Democratic Party?
So this is a really good question, and I think it's got to do with Donald Trump and Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis over the last couple of years. I don't know whether they've read history, but whether you read Mussolini or Hitler or more recently Duterte or Orban or Bukele in El Salvador, if you can translate any problem into a sense of chaos and a loss of law and order, which this incarnation of the Republican Party and Donald Trump have been doing for a long time, right? Tying people to crimes. Immigration is about crime, as opposed to where I come from in Canada, where immigration saved that country and made it a prosperous country. They just see immigration differently. They turned immigration into chaos. And then people are saying, well, he said he was going to solve this chaos. And I may not like the way he's doing it, but he's definitely doing it. He's sending a message. Our borders are not open, and he is. So once you translate everything into they're taking advantage of us, they're criminals, they're bad for us, which he's done with tariffs and imports, right? We've completely lost the plot on this thing about the fact that we import and buy things because we want them, because we're a wealthy country that buys things from countries that make stuff. We've lost the plot. Everything is now about they're cheats, they're criminals, they're coming after you and your lifestyle. And he's convinced people of it. And we're going to have to figure out a way to convince people again that the way you run a country is based on policies that we debate and we agree upon or at least come to terms on together, and then we enforce it properly. Because once you go down this road with all these people approving of what Donald Trump is doing, you get yourself a Duterte or a Erdogan or an Orban, where you've just given the king, the elected king, the right to do things that they do not have the constitutional or legal right to do, because it feels like it makes your life more orderly. All fun and games until they come for the thing that you value.
Exactly. I want to get back to the tariffs. I'm going to do that in a little bit, but I wanted to get your take on the Harvard lawsuit that was filed against the United States government. Harvard obviously suing the government over what they claim, and many, myself included, believe is executive overreach. How does this tie into the broader war on education and intellectualism in America? Because one of the things that I love about you and I love about your show is your entire creation of the Velshi book ban. Because this is what I see coming next. Is this about power, or do you think this is about punishment?
Well, that's a super question, because you and I did an entire show on retribution, right?
We sure did.
That is a driving force for Donald Trump. But I think it's just a confluence of events, right? Donald Trump's mad and likes punishment. But on the other hand, this idea of banning ideas and anti-intellectualism and book banning is always about power and rarely succeeds, right? Book banning, generally speaking, anybody who does it, civilizations don't exist, don't thrive when you do that. But this concept, putting aside whether or not Harvard's got a sound legal argument, most Americans shouldn't concern themselves with the legal argument. They should concern themselves with the idea, the concept that the government is inserting itself into one of the last bastions of critical thinking and debate, right? You can argue all sides of whether or not universities have handled certain events over the last 5 to 10 years consistently and correctly. And I think there are arguments about that. You can argue about whether, you can't really argue about whether anti-Semitism is a real and growing concern. It absolutely is, and we should all be together in fighting it. But once you start jumbling it all together and you use it as an argument to put forth an argument about anti-intellectualism, you're failing society. And a lot of prominent university presidents and others, intellectuals and free speech experts, have made the case that this is really dangerous. They're piecing together, cobbling together some nonsense, and they're now saying that that's what they're defending by coming down on these schools. Columbia, I mean, they put an entire department into some sort of controllership. I mean, fine, they're saying that they're dealing with it because it's the Middle Eastern Studies Department. But how do you square that once they start taking over your biology department, right? Where they decide what germs you study. The NIH grants that have been taken away. NIH is studying something, Michael, today that you and I won't know about, that might save us 20, 25 years down the road, but from some illness that we don't know we're going to
Ali,
get, and we don't know how it will be
Ali,
caused. I know you're
sure.
going to tell me. I know what you're going to tell me. You're not going to be
So
around.
one of the things that they are actually working on, but you're right, we're not going to be around. But one of the things that they're actually working on is a cure for Parkinson.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, a cure for Parkinson. I have
Yes.
several friends who have Parkinson. My grandfather passed of Parkinson,
Right.
and sadly, I have other family members who have Parkinson, what appears to be Parkinson's.
Yeah. As
I'm
do
not
I, and
certain.
anybody who's
I'm
got
not certain.
relatives. Yeah, but that's the thing, right? We're living to older ages, thank God, which means dementia, Parkinson's, they're all going to come for us. And there's stuff that they're working on that you shouldn't even know about. You and I shouldn't know about because it's too smart for us. The Ozempic, right? The GLP-1s, which are going to, once they become accessible to everybody at a good price, they're going to solve one of the biggest killers in this country, which is diabetes, right?
Right.
The epidemic of obesity and diabetes that we have in this country. That came from researching the saliva of a Gila monster. And people mocked it at the time. It was an NIH funded stuff. Why are we studying the saliva Gila monster? Because you don't know, because we're not smart enough to know why we're studying it. Someone's studying it and coming up with a cure to this stuff. Same with COVID. It came out of NIH research stuff. But we don't know that. When government works, it's doing its job in a way that we don't know. And when universities work, they're struggling with stuff. I get it. They should be having debates about how to handle certain things.
This has nothing to do with Harvard at all. This has to do,
Correct.
It's an affiliate of Harvard. It doesn't affect the student body, not one iota. Harvard has a $54 billion endowment that's growing. They could literally pay for everybody's education and still have money left over. That's not what this is about. And shame on this administration and all of those that are whispering in Trump's ear, this is a good idea. You're hurting America. You're hurting the people who voted for you as well. But, Ali, I have a question that only Ali Velshi could actually answer. And I thought long and hard when I was preparing this question. What happens when knowledge becomes the enemy of the state?
Yeah. The Holocaust happens. Dictatorship happens. The end of democracy comes. The power we have is knowledge, right? That's the only power we have. The knowledge and the ability to speak, the ability to debate, the freedom to debate. My family, as you know, came from South Africa, where they literally, Black people got different dictionaries than white people got. Black people got dictionaries that were designed to cause you to be a laborer for the rest of your life. So you had the words in it that you would need to know if you were a gardener or you were somebody's servant or something of that nature. My father said he didn't even know there were public libraries growing up because they weren't accessible to non-white people. Right? Knowledge is the enemy of dictatorship, of authoritarianism, of the worst impulses in life. And the reason I brought the Holocaust, I don't like to make examples like this. I don't throw the term Holocaust around, but I remind people that Hitler just constantly carried on about combining the existing ills of society, things that people were frustrated about, and finding someone to blame for it who was entirely unrelated to the blame, in this case, Jews, which is a long-held thing in history, right? Blaming the Jews for things they had nothing to do with. But you do it enough for long enough, and it works. And in Germany in 1933, people would have said, this is Germany, artistically advanced, scientifically advanced, academically advanced in culture, advanced in politics. You can't destroy this. You can't destroy our academic world. You can't. And they did. They did. That's the point, that if you steal knowledge or you curtail knowledge and you burn books and you do things like this, people become ripe for nonsense. And nonsense can lead to the end of democracy, and it can lead to death. And this is why we have to fight like this. Like every one of these battles is your own. You may not be a Harvard grad or Harvard alum, or maybe like me, they're never going to let me into the place. But I need to fight for everybody's right to speak and think freely. Because once that's gone, it's very hard to get back.
Oh, it's impossible, because those that will empower will never allow power to escape them, right? So let me then ask you this, because the more that we see and the more that we hear from Trump and this administration, Trump really has created a war on elites. Except the interesting thing that I find is that his war on elites somehow always seems to exclude the Mar-a-Lago elites.
Yeah, the folks around him, the elites around him are exempted.
They're exempt.
And there's a really good ticket to becoming one of the elites around him, right? Money gets you in. Bending the knee gets you into the club, right? There's a way, people who you didn't associate with being big Trump friends are now benefiting from all of these little policies that come in. There's a tariff, except there's an exemption on iPhones. There's a tariff on this, except there's an exemption on that. So the Jeff Bezos of the world, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, these guys who you didn't even think were there. And by the way, a whole bunch of people in Trump's circle who are making these policies are elites. They are really, really rich, right? What's his name? The Commerce Secretary, Lutnick, talking about if it was his mother or didn't get her Social Security check, it wouldn't bother her. Mother-in-law didn't get a suit. You're a billionaire, man. That's why your mother-in-law is not going to worry about her Social Security check. If we were all billionaires, I wouldn't mind if mine didn't come either. That's not the world most Americans live in. And we need to, I think you hit on something very important. It's a war on elites unless you're my elite. And by the way, that's how North Korea runs. That's how Iran runs. That's how all these places runs. The elite are bad. Runs. Yes, the elites are bad unless you're my elites, and I'm perhaps getting something out of it.
Yeah, it's the whole Russia oligarchy that they're.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Here in America.
And the problem is it doesn't resonate, right? The word doesn't resonate, and people don't really get how oligarchy relates to them. This is how it relates to you. You do the things that the guy in charge wants. You get rich. You help him out. You give a donation to his library or his campaign, whatever, his inauguration. I mean, it's so old-fashioned that I'm not understanding why everybody is not saying, wow, this is a grift. This is what corruption actually looks like. Remember, we used to talk in the first Trump administration about emoluments and whether it's that people who visit Trump should stay at his hotel. I mean, that is such small potatoes compared to where we are now. But this is the world we live in because they soften you up with it on that end and you stop thinking about it. And now we just live in this world.
Soften up. I mean, this is like taking a marshmallow and just pounding it with a sledgehammer. Yeah. I mean, for God's sakes, we were talking about like the Saudi government spent $1 million at the Trump hotel in Washington, D.C.
How quaint, right?
Do you have any fucking clue how much money Trump has made from those meme coins or from his Truth Social that he's pushing there? His Truth Social has actually done for him what he always claimed that he was. He's made over $9 billion, literally since becoming president-elect to today. Put that into perspective on $1 million from people staying.
Correct.
Right.
But that's the problem, right?
All right, fellas, look, let's cut the crap. You're in the mood, the lights are low, the music's on point, and suddenly, well, your little general decides taking the night off. Yeah, it happens. It's like trying to start a car with no gas. It's frustrating. It's humiliating. And honestly, it's kind of tragic. But here's the thing. You don't have to suffer through that sad sitcom anymore because Hims is in the game now. So men, if ED is getting you down, you need Hims to help you get your confidence and, well, other things back up. I mean, we're talking personalized, doctor-trusted treatments like Viagra, Cialis, even the chewable tablets, all available for up to 95% less. Yeah, 95% less than what you pay for at the pharmacy. And the best part? No awkward doctor's office, no pharmacy side-eye, no insurance hoops. It's all online, done from your couch, which, well, let's be honest, it might already be your battlefield or your disappointment. So you just fill out an intake form. It's easy stuff. And a real medical provider figures out the best treatment plan for you. And if prescribed, it ships discreetly and directly to your door for free. Hims is changing the way men deal with ED. And thank God, because the old way, it sucked. But this is fast, it's private, it's effective, and it works. So let's get real. This isn't just about performance. No, it's about taking control, about feeling like you again and showing up when it matters. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/Cohen. That's HIMS.com/Cohen for your personalized ED treatment options. And the featured products include compounded products which are not approved nor verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
The emoluments and people staying at the hotel was nothing compared to what we've got now. But because some people thought it was nothing then, we've got what we've got now. Right now, we've got this world where it's just a multiple, right? Billions is just a multiple of millions, but we're there. We don't even think now. The White House doesn't even worry about it. They don't even bother covering their tracks. They don't even bother with the idea that, someone might think that maybe we made a deal with one of these companies to give them preferential treatment. No one seems to care anymore. They are behaving in a way that a lot of experts, I'm not a lawyer, would say are lawless. And half of America thinks, well, at least he's getting rid of the immigrants.
Yeah, right. Could you imagine, as my father would say, it's only a matter of zeros, right?
It's only a matter of zeros.
A billion, it's only a number of zeros.
Which is probably why we should concentrate on principles, right? When somebody brings it up and says this is the wrong thing to do, we should probably concentrate on that, because now we're just doing wrong in multiples.
Exactly. Meanwhile, speaking about billionaires, you got Elon Musk appears to be stepping back from government entanglements, thank God, right? And his crypto circus. I want to ask you this. Is that a strategic retreat? Or do you think it's a signal that even he knows that Trump's government is radioactive?
That's a good question. I don't know that I'd give him the benefit of that doubt. I don't know. I mean, I used to think he was the smartest guy on earth by a long shot, and I'm now realizing he's just not. But there are a couple things here. One is, despite how rich he has a massive pay packet from X and from Tesla, and so the bad performance of Tesla does actually have some material effect on him, more than the money that he gave to Donald Trump. So on one hand, he has a reason to actually pay attention to his stuff. On the other hand, I don't know what he downloaded. I mean, he got himself into everything. Could be on a big hard drive somewhere where he's got all our information and he can already do with it what he wants. I don't know. I don't know what this is. I don't know what the strategy is with Elon Musk. One thing that polling indicates is across the political spectrum, while Donald Trump's enforcement of immigration might be popular, nothing Elon Musk is doing is popular with anybody, right? He has annoyed people across the political spectrum, including veterans, including the fact that people are sort of figuring out that there's $5 trillion in tax cuts that's going to be paid for in part by a trillion dollars almost in cuts to Medicaid, right? At some point, people are doing some math and saying, when you let the rich and unhinged run your government, bad things might happen to the poor and not unhinged, or people who depend on government services. So Elon Musk, perhaps because he makes no effort to make any of this palatable, has pissed off a lot of people. So I don't know I don't know if this is Trump saying you need to back out, or Elon Musk saying I'm going to suffer financially by being attached to you, or you're crazy, or Trump saying to Elon Musk, you're crazy. I don't know what's going on there, but yes, I'm with you. I think America would be better with a little less Elon Musk involved in our government.
But
let me add one thing. I think you and I would both agree. There's nobody who won't agree. We would like the most efficient government we can have, right? I would like to pay fewer taxes. Like, that's not a Republican thing. We would all like to pay less in taxes and have efficient government. It's harder to do than you think. Al Gore and Bill Clinton tried it, and they made some progress, but it was a thought out process. This just doesn't make any sense. The stuff they're doing doesn't make sense. And by the way, we're running a war apparently in Yemen, which we're not at war with, that's costing a lot of money. Every time Pete Hegseth sends out a signal chat about what he's going to do, that's billions and billions of taxpayer dollars on a country we're not at war with. None of it makes economic sense. If you're actually trying to have more efficient government, they're not actually doing the things you need for more efficient government. They're just doing things.
Right. And the greatest is Elon Musk, a long line with, the Trump bullshit propaganda nonsense. We're going to cut $2 trillion from our $6 trillion budget.
Yeah, imagine that.
Next thing you know, about, 80 days in, They have this guy who's not even a government employee sitting at a cabinet, meeting around the big gigantic table where Donald says, "All right, Elon, it's Elon, right? Say something." And he gets up and he says, "Yeah, it looks like, Doge has now been successful in finding $150 billion worth of fraud, waste, and abuse." Can you imagine how terrible? Wait. I thought we were talking $2 trillion. In fact, the 150 billion has already been debunked several different ways by
saying
it's
not even
those
that.
It's not even that. Those programs were already shut down. And so he's taking credit for things that were already shut down or things that just don't even exist. The part I want to ask you about, going back to Elon Musk here, in my thought is that Trump is getting sick of his antics, sitting in the Oval Office, sucking up his oxygen with little X on his shoulder like a monkey, right? Like in the olden days. I remember years ago when I was a little kid, my parents took me to King's Plaza, right, in Brooklyn. And there was a guy that was walking around. He had a little monkey on his shoulder, and he played one of those little boxes and so on. And the little monkey would run around, and you give him, money, little quarters and stuff in a little pishach, and stuff like that. That's what I think. That's what Trump is seeing in Elon Musk. I don't care how rich that the guy is, but I do also think that Elon is concerned. You're right. He's not a stupid man. And I think by stepping away, he thinks he's going to be able to insulate himself from legal exposure down the road as the feds ultimately close in on big tech collusion with disinformation. Because let's not forget, they downloaded all that information. On top of that, there's a whole bunch of things that appear like the crashing of the market after it skyrocketed 1,500 points. People made $1 trillion in a period of 90 seconds. All right.
Well, in the old days, we used to have an SEC and an FTC and an FCC who were looking into these things, right? That's the part of the problem is that one hopes, right? Because that's the thing, that there were the SEC can figure out if there was insider trading. They know, they have algorithms. They have an ability to know that this person never traded in this stock before or never did this. Like, they can figure this out, but they're gutting so much of the enforcement. Look at the IRS, right? They're gutting enforcement. People who earn $50,000 a year don't get audited by the IRS, generally speaking, right? People with higher net worth usually get audited. So you're getting the auditors out, right? All the folks who make lots of money, they're doing all these things to protect people with money and power and influence. And unfortunately, the SEC, the FTC, the FCC, the CFRB, all of these things fall into this category of things regular people don't know work for them on their behalf. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to go out in the street and protest for the cutting of these things, including USAID, because you don't really know what it does, or the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences. There's 70 people in a government agency they're cutting. Nobody knows to protest it, except they might fund your local library. So this is the problem with government. We have for 50 years, since Ronald Reagan, been smack-talking government. And we've lost sense of the idea that sometimes you need a government, right? You're not going to install the traffic light at your intersection. That's actually a role for government. There are things that government should do and there are things that government shouldn't do, and that's a valid discussion. But we're actually wrecking the government at the moment, and we may be wrecking it too much. And by the way, not at much of a saving. We're not saving enough money. Firing people that's not where our budget goes. So we're doing the wrong thing. And I only hope that we get our heads around this so that when we do rebuild government, we rebuild the enforcement mechanisms, because all the stuff you're talking about doesn't get investigated and doesn't get prosecuted if there's no one there to watch, if there's no cops on the beat.
Ali, you know what a lot of people don't realize? So when you're cutting somebody's job, what you're also cutting, by the way, is something called taxes, right? That those individuals pay tax on the income that they derive. Yep. On top of that, when they go to the grocery store, because they're not using SNAP food stamps and stuff like that, they're actually paying a tax on that as well. It's called sales tax and so on and so forth. So that's called like trickle down.
And the economy. You're preventing a recession, right? We believe that we actually put money into the economy to keep it going. I mean, government pays somebody $100,000. they're getting 33% of that back in taxes. That's not accounting for the sales taxes. That's not accounting for the property taxes, the education taxes. That's not accounting for what that person who earned that $100,000 who pays taxes is spending in their community so that somebody else pays taxes, right? This is not high level economics, right? You don't have to be an economist. You don't even have to have gone to business school. You would just understand that's how the American system works. And it largely works. There was some trimming to be done around the edges. I fully agree with that. And maybe it's more than around the edges. But because we have grown to disrespect government so much as a society, you're not seeing that polling that you talked to, you're not seeing people saying Donald Trump's wrecking government. You're saying Donald Trump's cutting government. He's making it cheaper for me. Good luck to you. I hope that works out. Look at all the people who wanted lower regulation, lower taxes, right? So they vote for Donald Trump. You may want lower taxes, but fundamentally you want more money in the end, right? So if your lower taxes comes on a lower base because your property values are down or your stock values are down, who cares? You're paying less tax on less money, right? Don't we all as society, wouldn't we all like more money for ourselves? This just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any economic sense, Michael.
So let me talk about the tariffs for a second, because Trump and his enablers are claiming that every country, and it's not some countries, it's every country, because he speaks in totalities, right? That every country is crawling back to him to renegotiate tariffs. Is there any evidence of that? Or is this just more MAGA fiction dressed up as economic strategy, even though it's just a complete and total screw up?
So it's kind of interesting because Donald Trump, as you and I have discussed, doesn't like a multilateral world, right? That's why he doesn't really like NATO and he doesn't like big trade deals, because he wants everything to be bilateral. He's a mercantilist. He believes if America is in a trading deal with every country individually, America will always get the better end of the deal because it's the bigger, richer country. And that's generally the case. May not be the case with the EU, may not be the case with China, but for every other country, it's the case. So you would think that when you do nonsensical things like put ridiculous tariffs on Canada, which is 1/10 the size of the United States, would not be in a position to fight back. Except the Canadian Prime Minister is now the guy who was the head of the Bank of Canada and the head of the Bank of England. Nobody's ever held two different jobs as two different central banks. He's an economist. He's a really smart guy who went around to a whole bunch of countries that hold U.S. debt, U.S. treasuries, U.S. bonds that week of the 90% tariffs, and told everybody, why don't we start selling? Why don't we start pushing the value of U.S. bonds down? And that's what happened. I'm not saying it's all Mark Carney. I'm saying people have tools that are not groveling up to Donald Trump. They have ways to fight these things collectively. If America doesn't want to be part of collective negotiations, fine. America, you can go it alone. Canada will sit there with other countries and say, we're not going to take this. And they can inflict harm. Nobody can win a straight up economic battle with America. That's a fact. Maybe China can. Maybe the EU can as a totality. But they can inflict harm. And once you start annoying your absolute allies like Canada, they're not going to come back to the table sometimes. They're going to come to an agreement. Canada said, we got a lot of energy, we got a lot of potash, we got a lot of things America needs, so does the rest of the world. We'll just find ways to sell it to the rest of the world. And once that starts happening, it's very hard to build it back. I'll give you one quick example. Back when Trump was president last time, he imposed certain tariffs, and China then stopped buying American soybeans. Now, China was the biggest buyer of American soybeans.
Yep. 80%.
China then started buying from Brazil, and Brazil ramped up its ability to produce that much soybean and sell it to China. That market now exists. You'll never go back to being where you were. We paid $28 billion to subsidize farmers because of that stuff. So that came out of your taxes, and we weren't selling our soybeans. And these farmers were stuck with stuff that's rotting, which is what's happening today. So you can't think this way. It's 2025. It's not the 1600s. You can't think in terms of unilateral stuff. So yeah, maybe there are some countries begging for a new deal. Most countries are not.
Yeah, and they're not. That's the funny thing. And what they do is they just lie, and they turn around and they say to you that they do. So for example, I want to just use an example that you brought up. How could there ever be a equal trade, which is what Trump thinks that we're going to, well, if you spend $1, then we want to spend $1. Take Vietnam as an example. I mean, their entire GDP is what? $4 trillion or something like that. It's less than our annual budget. That's their entire GDP. What's a big product that comes out of Vietnam? Your Nike sneakers, right? So how are you supposed to go dollar for dollar with a country that doesn't equal into 1/100th of our GDP? Just imagine that, 1/100th of our GDP. And now you want to go dollar for dollar with them off of what? And you think that you're going to bring, because Nike turns around and says, and I'm just using Nike as an example, oh, we're going to build a factory in America. So the sneaker that costs us $7 before shipping and customs and all that, we're going to $7. We're going to now, it's going to cost us $50 to do it in America, if that low, which now means we have to sell it for not $100 a sneaker, but $400 per sneaker. What do you think ends up ultimately happening? Obviously, nobody starts buying them, and so you start laying people off. But here's the thing people also forget, and it's so stupid, and nobody brings it up. I'm sure, and I hope to God that you do on your show to educate people. Just as a simple fact of business, Trump is going to be president for another, say, 3 years and 9 months.
Unless you're listening to Steve Bannon, but yeah.
Right. Many of these companies that Trump claims that are coming in with trillions of dollars to invest in America, the factories that he's talking about will not be ready until after he already leaves. Hypothetically, Michael Cohen runs for the presidency and I win. All of the shit that he's done is by executive order. What do? I do my own executive orders and I cancel them out. So now there's these facilities that are being built that are 70%, 80%, 90% ready for completion. And now I turn around and I say to Vietnam, I say to China, I'm sorry that my predecessor was a complete and total economic idiot. So we're going to reopen up trade the same way it was pre-Trump. Okay, maybe I'll keep 10% as a tariff on just so that it's something.
Yep.
Let's open up and let's start doing again. Well,
then those factories are now wasted.
That's all wasted. And they never actually open. They become basically eyesores in communities.
You brought this up with respect to immigration, but it's the same thing with manufacturing. What's the policy? We would like to bring some manufacturing jobs. The reason there's something called the CHIPS Act is because we learned in COVID that the supply chain problems affected semiconductors, and semiconductors are in everything, right? From your phone to your car to your dishwasher to your fridge. Like, who knew I didn't know there were semiconductors in your fridge, but whatever. We should probably manufacture more of them here. Now, that's a high value product where you can pay trained workers a good enough salary that it makes sense to build it in America and you protect them. It's not as cheap as building it in some places, but most of them come from Taiwan. They're also not that cheap. Why do we want sneaker manufacturing? Why do we want sock manufacturing? The stuff we put a 54% tariff on Lesotho. Same example. He said it was a big trade imbalance. Lesotho, I don't know what their GDP per capita is. I gotta buy an equal amount of stuff that we buy from them. Somebody made the example. I don't know if it was in the Wall Street Journal or who it was who said, we have a trade deficit with our grocery store, right? You go and you pay the money and you buy orange juice because someone else grew the orange and planted the orange and picked the orange and packaged the orange and transported the orange. So you give them $10 and you get orange juice. Is that a trade imbalance? Or is that just the way it works? I have money and I don't want to grow oranges. So but you grow oranges and you need my money. Good trade. Donald Trump doesn't seem to understand that a wealthy country like us wants to buy from other countries. There are some things that other countries make because they're at a different level of their development that are cheaper than what we make, and their wages are lower. Tariffs can be a tool to try and equalize some of that, but we don't actually want to be making sneakers in America, generally speaking. We do want to be making semiconductors in America. So you're right. A semiconductor factory also takes some time to make, but at least there's a policy behind it to say X percentage of our semiconductors, because that's an important thing to us. And if we get into a pandemic and supply chain problems, we want to be able to have enough semiconductors so people can have cars and fridges and dishwashers and cell phones. Right?
Or
that's
one people turn around and tell you, right? we can have Americans screwing in screws in the back of your cell phone.
But we don't want that. And that's what I'm saying. But that's a good debate to have. But we don't probably want that. So why are we doing that? Because exactly like you said, when Donald Trump's successor comes in and doesn't have a nuts policy about tariffs, and we undo this, people will lose their investments. And that's why it's hard for unstable countries to get investment in the first place, because investments take years. And if they don't think that your government is going to have the same policy 5 years from now or 10 years from now, guess what? You're just not getting the factory. End of
Correct.
story.
So he talks about $7 trillion of pledges and I'm going to bet 10 to 1 that not even $1 trillion of investment comes into this guy. Not even $100 billion comes in, for exactly the point that you bring up, which is that unless they can ensure that that factory is going to produce for them, not just 5 years, 10 years, but 50 years. That's how they model this.
Because you're buying a big piece of land. Trump in his first administration talked about Foxconn, the Chinese company, making a big factory in Wisconsin that they were going to, I think it was Wisconsin, they were going to build also. This factory never broke ground. Nothing ever happened with that. Now, where might the investment come in? From actual American companies that like Apple, that'll say, you know what, we're going to keep this guy happy and we're going to build a plant here to do something. I don't know what.
I don't think so. Because what'll happen again, it takes, say, 3 years to build the factory and to staff it. A lot of Americans don't want to, Howard Lutnick, sit there and start, screwing in screws into motherboards and so on and so forth, right? So they're going to end up building this to keep this guy happy when in 3 years from now, they know they're shutting the plant down.
They don't need to. Yeah.
And they're going to go right back to China.
Look, I'm not against the idea that we strategically bring some manufacturing back to America that we need. So this car part stuff, right? We've got a really good car building system between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. It actually works really, really well. It's got some hiccups, but it works really well.
This episode of Mea Culpa is brought to you by Graza, my new favorite olive oil. It's fresh, it's never blended, and it comes from a single type of olive, the Picual, straight out of Jaén, Spain, where over half of the world's olive oil is produced. So why Graza? Single origin goodness, that's why. Only one olive from one region. No mysterious blends. That means a traceable, a fresher product without mixing in any low grade or unknown oils. It's super fun. It has squeeze and spray bottles too. So there's no more messy tins or drippy spouts. Just aim, squeeze, and go. I mean, there are 3 types for any task that you have. One, they have something called frizzle. That's their newest, with a higher 490-degree Fahrenheit smoke point, which is perfect for frying, crisping, or grilling. Sizzle at 410 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an everyday cooking oil for roasting, marinating, and sauteing. Then they have something called drizzle, which is a bold, punchy finishing oil that you sprinkle on your salads, you dip your bread in, or even you top it off on your ice cream. Look, let me be clear. My daughter is the actual chef in the house, and she uses olive oil on everything from pastas to preparing steak. I mean, not only does this cook well, it smells delicious. Plus, as a healthy eater, Graza's extra virgin oils, they are loaded with those heart and brain friendly polyphenols. So it's good for you. Look, so here's what you get. You get 10% off your first order on Graza's site. But I personally suggest grabbing the trio. That's all the 3 squeezy bottles, the sizzle, the frizzle, and the drizzle, so that you're set for every style of cooking. So head right now to graza.co and use code Cohen to get 10% off of Trio, which includes, again, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle, and get to cooking your next chef-quality meal. Again, head to Graza, Graza.co, and use code Cohen, Cohen, to get 10% off the Trio. And I love saying it, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle. So get cooking now.
What we don't have, for instance, is electric vehicle capabilities. Really, I mean, it's China can build their cheapest BYD vehicle. That's an electric vehicle for I think $12,000. So if you put 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, it's $24,000, which is still cheaper than the cheapest electric vehicle that you can build in in America. So that's a real thing, right? That's a real argument that, okay, maybe there should be tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles because that's an industry that we should have a part in. But willy-nilly across the board tariffs make no sense at all for anything, and they're only damaging for the exact reason you point out. It just introduces instability in decision making. Companies don't want instability in decision making. If they think they're going to waste 3 years building a factory that they're not going to need in 4 years, you're absolutely right. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah, they're not. Meanwhile, speaking about China called Trump on his bluff. Right? I mean, They are standing firm, just as Canada is, but they're standing firm, calls Trump's bluff, and American consumers, and I don't know why, there is still a large group of Americans that just refuse to acknowledge that it is the consumer that is going to get stuck with the bill.
Because he kept saying it's not. He kept saying they're going to pay. They're cheating us and they're going to pay.
And I don't care if he says he's 6'3", 215 pounds, the same weight as Tom Brady or some of these other professional athletes. My question I want to really ask you is, I mean, right? How long before the base finally wakes up and realizes that they are the ones who are getting played? When you go into
it's a good question,
and right. Well,
but they're not listening to you and they're not listening to me, right? So that's the problem. That's the problem.
I have the great Ali Velshi on my show. I'm not coming at you with just some random questions like, hey, where are you?
No, you're right. I mean, people registered that the cost of eggs was higher, right? So they do register these things. We know when the cost of gas goes up. So at some point, people will need to figure this out. The danger, of course, is that in the process of everybody figuring this out, we've still got inflation, which it's largely under control, but tariffs will increase inflation. And Donald Trump keeps wanting to bring interest rates down, which, by the way, I'd also like lower interest rates, but it's not probably a good policy decision right now. So you could get yourself into a slower economy that has some inflation, and you can't fix it because that becomes stagflation. And we had this in the 70s. Japan had it for a decade. It wrecked their economy. Yep. When you and I were growing up, everything was made in Japan. Japan was going to be the biggest deal in the world. And then it wasn't because of stagflation. So the problem with Donald Trump is he could do two things. He could put America into stagflation, and he could put the world into an economic tailspin. And while everybody's figuring out whether this is good or bad for them in America, that could happen. And then it could really turn on you. So I hope people figure this out. But we're asking people to do, it's a heavy lift, right? Because most people don't talk about tariffs in their daily life. So if Donald Trump tells you tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language, and they're this and they're that, and those people are cheating us and they're going to pay, and you don't really know much about economics because most people don't, you will only feel it when something goes wrong, when you lose your job, when a recession comes, when inflation really hits, when you can't, I looked at the last month or so of economic data, it's still pretty stable across America. One thing that's doing really well, car sales, because people are so worried about these tariffs that they went out and bought cars ahead of prices going up. Mm-hmm. It's not normal, rational behavior because he's doing not normal, rational things. And at some point, that'll start to hit every American. They'll start to say, hey, my eggs are not really cheaper, and my iPhone costs 3 times as much, and my Nikes cost more. How is this better for me again? Hope it's not too late by the time everybody figures it out.
Trust me, it will be, because they are literally waiting. You start thinking, listening to some of the veterans, right? There was a massive amount of veterans that voted for Trump. All of a sudden, now that they basically fired the entire VA, you're talking about 80,000 plus people that have now lost their job. Veterans
They're mad.
They are mad.
Yep.
And they have every right to be mad. They put their lives on the line for us so that we can have this conversation to protect our country, our constitution, our way of life. And all of a sudden now you're pulling benefits for whether it's physical disabilities as a result of war or mental disabilities. All of this is now gonzo. And they're like, whoa. The fuck is happening here? I voted for this ass clown. Now all of a sudden you're telling me that we're sitting here and we're trying to understand how long is it going to take before people finally wake up, and the way that they wake up. So I'll give you a great example. There's somebody who I know here in New York, in the city, who happens to be friendly with Lutnick. And this person is in the clothing business. Now you could imagine that their company imports everything from overseas. And now They can't get it. The tariffs make the cost of the good so high that that company cannot sustain itself. All of a sudden, because they're very close friends, all of a sudden they're mad. Now they're mad. Before that, oh, praise Howard. He's going to be Secretary of Commerce and so on. Now all of a sudden, what the hell is this idiot thinking about? What is he doing? He just destroyed my business that took me 20 years to build and to develop. He destroyed it by simply breathing in Trump's ear the same bullshit that Trump was spewing back to him, which is, hey, Howard, aren't tariffs the greatest thing you've ever seen since sliced bread? And he goes, it is, boss. It is, because he doesn't want to.
And he should. And Howard Lutnick absolutely knows better. And
he
yet,
sure does.
That's the way it goes. And you know this, right? That it's just all about sucking up to the boss. And this is why, right to your first point, this is why every one of us needs to be concerned about the courts. We need to be concerned about the Salvadorian citizens. We need to be concerned about these students that are getting disappeared as much as we need to be concerned about tariffs, because you can't wait until the day it affects you. If it's wrong, and you need to start thinking about it. That's the problem. Everybody will wake up when it starts to affect them. And it's unfortunately, that may be too late, because by the time it affects you, the system has become so broken that you don't have a voice in the matter anymore. Once in a while it works because people sell their stocks, and then Trump gets spooked, and then he says he doesn't want to fire Jerome Powell all of a sudden, even though that's all he's been talking about since he got the presidency. People don't want to do business this way. It's nonsensical. And if you're a small business people, which is what most of the value in America is still created by small businesses, and most new jobs still come from small businesses, you can't plan for this stuff. If you're Kroger's, you can say to your suppliers, we're not paying you more for the apples. If you're, a major corporation, you can say that. If you're a schmata dealer, a fabric dealer, a clothing dealer, you can't. You don't have that kind of strength. And that's the problem, that regular people in America do not have the strength to deal with the vicissitudes of this administration's on again, off again tariff and economic nonsense.
So look, the hour goes, as I told you, it goes by way too fast, because I could talk to you for 100 hours. I have one last question for you here. And obviously, because of your position with on television and so on, this is really a question that only you, again, would be able to answer. I mean, we all have to acknowledge, my listeners, you, certainly I, that the Trump administration, Carolyn Levitt, they lie with such frequency and shamelessness. I always turn around and say, they lie the way that you breathe. Is the press doing enough to confront the Caroline Levitts of the world, the lies, the enablers, or are they just giving these liars airtime and legitimacy under the guise of balance?
Yeah, I think we're doing a better job. I think we've understood that balance is a trick. You talk about the fact that they lie the way I breathe. I don't breathe that fast. The velocity of the lies is actually hard to compute in your head. Like our brains don't even think that fast in some cases. So I mean, you're a fast thinker. You're fast on your feet. But no, we're not all that fast on our feet. And these guys move at a pace that I have to say, on one hand, I admire, because like, how do you lie like that with such conviction? I think the press continues to struggle, right? We continue to struggle with what's the limit? At what point do you just sort of, you become Daniel Dale and say, that was lie number, what are we at, 100,000 or whatever the case is? I don't think we're masterful at it yet. I think we're trying. My business, as you know, is I just break everything down. I just explain, try and tell you what the actual story is. This is a lie, and here's my long math. But the world doesn't consume long division anymore. And so somebody else says something else, and it's wittier and it's quicker and whatever the case is. I can prove to you why it's a lie. I'm an economics journalist. I can prove to you all of this stuff. But do you want to sit and listen to my proof? That's the problem. The hour goes by fast, but do people want to actually hear the truth, or do they want to hear what makes them feel good?
Well, they want the truth. Everybody wants to be made to feel good, but I believe that they want the truth. So you sit and you listen to some of these nonsensical, rantings going on in the Oval Office or in the briefing room, and they get up and the journalist asks a very good question, poignant, right? Curt, and then you get the weave, right? Whether it's Caroline Levitt, you get the weave where they're talking about something completely different that they weaved into this thing. And there's no follow-up with the question, right? At which point in time, if I was inside the briefing room, I'd be, whoa, Caroline, that's not remotely the question that I asked you. So let me ask it again to you, and don't take this the wrong way, but I'm actually looking for an answer to my question, not to your
spin,
your pre-prepared spin or your whatever you want to call it. And then repeat it and say, and don't talk to me about immigrants and MS-13 and how Trump is the smartest guy that has ever. That's not my question. So let's stay focused. Otherwise, just turn around and tell me, I don't want to answer the question. All right. You're not going to be welcome back in the briefing room.
And well, that's the other thing, right? They're starting to control who gets to ask the questions.
Sure. But here's the funnier part. If they do that, what I would do is take all media other than the right-wing media and leave. It's like what the Democrats should have done during the first State of the Union. Pick yourself up and leave. Don't let him sit there and lie to you. Let half the visual of half the place completely empty would be spectacular. Imagine.
I do worry, though, that in the end, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to listen to it, did the tree fall? I do worry about that. That if we leave, and I get it, I get the point. And I think about this with the Department of Justice, with the SDNY. Like, should people have left or should they have stayed to fight? It's a tough question because they might win if you leave. I mean, I hear you. I hear your criticism completely. And I wish we were doing a Pulitzer Prize winning job of this. But I do worry that leaving just gives them more space to lie at greater velocity. I don't know. I wish I could answer that.
They seem to be lying anyway. But Ali, thank you, my brother, for joining me again
As
on
always.
Mea Culpa. I miss seeing you. We got to get together back here when you're in New York and so on.
I appreciate it, my friend.
You have a great one, and I will definitely see you soon. Thank you for making us smarter.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
See you later, brother.